What does it truly mean to live from abundance instead of toward it? And why does this single shift hold the power to transform your entire relationship with wealth, success, and fulfillment? In this video, you're going to see how living from the end frees you from the endless struggle of pursuit, how it rewires your emotions, behavior, and energy so that you stop chasing and start radiating prosperity, and how this one mental reorientation can quietly realign the circumstances of your life without force or desperation. This is where it begins, with the recognition that every act of striving already contains the seed of lack, and that to live from wealth is to claim that seed as already fulfilled. This is how it unfolds, when you finally understand that abundance is not a destination to reach, but a frequency to remember. This is where truth breaks through, because the wealth you desire does not come to you, it comes from you. This is why it matters. For so many chase the symbol of prosperity, but never awaken the consciousness that gives rise to it. This is where illusion fades, as you begin to see that the one who waits for money is confessing that they do not have it, while the one who feels wealthy before evidence compels the outer world to obey that feeling. This is the turning point, when imagination becomes more real than numbers and when faith begins to govern what logic once ruled. This is where the inner stage lights up, as you step into the role of the one who already is, instead of the one who hopes to become. This is how the secret operates, hidden in plain sight. You must first possess wealth in consciousness before wealth can possess you in form. This is the echo of Neville Goddard's great mystery, that imagination creates reality, and assumption, not effort, is the bridge to manifestation. This is where your perspective shifts, as you realize that working harder from scarcity cannot match the effortless magnetism of working from fulfillment. This is where freedom whispers, inviting you to release the anxious grip of not yet, and to rest in the silent confidence of already done. This is how your emotions begin to change, replacing fear of loss with calm expectancy, and doubt with quiet certainty. This is where invisible wealth first moves, unseen but unmistakably alive, rearranging people and events in your favor. This is how gratitude becomes your natural language, not because you received something new, but because you finally recognized what was always yours. This is where your mind stops running and starts creating, no longer measuring worth by effort, but by alignment. This is how abundance stops being a theory and starts being your lived reality, where imagination and faith merge into evidence. This is where you finally awaken to the wealth state, not a place you travel to, but a home you remember within yourself. And from this awareness, everything that was once distant begins to move toward you. Can you imagine what happens when the endless pursuit of wealth suddenly dissolves, and instead of chasing prosperity, you begin to embody it with every thought, breath, and feeling? This is where it begins, as you recognize that the vibration of seeking always confesses lack, while the vibration of being declares completion. This is how it unfolds, when you stop trying to attract and instead express the state of abundance that already exists within you. This is where illusion fades, because you realize that every time you say, "I want," you are proclaiming that you do not yet have, and the universe faithfully mirrors that confession. This is the turning point, when desire transforms into awareness and effort gives way to embodiment. This is where truth emerges, revealing that abundance was never something to earn, but something to allow. This is how the shift deepens, when you no longer visualize from the outside looking in, but from the inside looking out, as if you already live in the fulfilled scene. This is where power returns to you, because the moment you assume wealth in imagination, reality begins to take shape around that conviction. This is how it feels, when you stop asking when and start saying now, when time itself bends to the certainty of your assumption. This is where faith stops being theory and becomes practice, a living art expressed through stillness and confidence. This is how energy rearranges itself, responding to the command of your inner state rather than the desperation of your outer striving. This is where the chase ends and creation begins, as you understand that the one who already is no longer seeks. This is how identity shifts, because the richest thing about you is not your possessions, but your perception. This is where calm replaces chaos, and you begin to walk through life as though your wealth were invisible but undeniable. This is how the law operates silently, reflecting every inner assumption as an outer fact. This is where your imagination becomes your greatest investment, paying infinite returns in peace, confidence, and fulfillment. This is how you begin to act, not to get, but to express, each action flowing from an overflowing source rather than a fearful need. This is where you realize that abundance was never hiding. It was only waiting for you to stop running. This is how the wealth state begins to feel real, because now, instead of living toward your dream, you live from it, and the world, at last, starts keeping up with you. Picture for a moment that the true currency of wealth is not paper, gold, or digital code, but imagination itself, silently shaping every fortune before it ever appears in form. This is where it begins, as you realize that all material riches are shadows cast by unseen pictures held faithfully in the mind. This is how it unfolds, when you see that the greatest investors were first dreamers who dared to believe their inner scenes more than external conditions. This is where truth shatters the surface illusion, revealing that imagination is not fantasy, it is creative law operating beneath every event of your life. This is the turning point, when you stop treating your inner world as a playground of thought and start honoring it as the blueprint of reality. This is where wealth begins in silence, as you sit quietly and see yourself already surrounded by ease, freedom, and accomplishment. This is how the unseen becomes substance, each mental image planting itself in consciousness like a seed certain to bloom. This is where illusion fades, for you begin to notice that money follows meaning, and meaning flows from imagination. This is how the wise live, knowing that their fortune is first mental before it is material. This is where the power hides in plain sight, within every as if you dare to feel real. This is how the mind spends energy before it spends cash, and why assuming wealth inwardly pays dividends outwardly. This is where confidence grows, not from visible proof, but from invisible possession. This is how the universe listens, not to words, but to emotional conviction vibrating beneath them. This is where wealth is rehearsed until it feels familiar, and what feels familiar must soon feel factual. This is how limitation dissolves, for imagination knows no budget, boundary, or bureaucracy. This is where gratitude fuses with vision, creating an atmosphere that magnetizes opportunity without effort. This is how the master creators think, painting their lives with the brush of belief. This is where you awaken to the quiet realization that every empire, every innovation, every fortune began as a private act of seeing. This is how you understand the wealth state, not as something you build, but something you imagine so vividly that reality has no choice but to follow. Now consider this. What if the real secret of wealth was not found in action, but in emotion, in the subtle inner art of feeling as though you already have what you desire? This is where it begins, when you learn that emotion is not a reaction to life, but the creative signal that molds it. This is how it unfolds, as you move from hoping and wanting to dwelling in the satisfaction of completion before any sign appears. This is where the invisible work happens, when you train your heart to feel fulfilled first, and let the outer world rise to meet that vibration. This is the turning point, where you stop waiting for results to justify joy and let joy become the cause of results. This is where truth glows softly beneath the noise, whispering that feelings are the frequency by which creation recognizes your order. This is how it becomes real, when you can sit in stillness, smile gently, and know that wealth is inevitable because it already exists within consciousness. This is where illusion crumbles, as you understand that every emotion of lack merely delays what faith would have delivered. This is how you begin to master the unseen, turning your emotional state into the architecture of destiny. This is where power feels gentle, where confidence needs no announcement and gratitude no proof. This is how reality starts to bend, quietly aligning itself with the emotional tone you maintain most faithfully. This is where effort becomes grace, because the feeling of already having replaces the anxious chase of trying to get. This is how abundance starts flowing to you, not through struggle, but through resonance. This is where the wealth state becomes natural, because to feel wealthy now is to prepay your future in emotional currency. This is how your vibration becomes your voice, telling the universe what reality to echo back. This is where peace returns, for once you feel complete, nothing outside can threaten or tempt you. This is how imagination and emotion merge into a single command to creation. This is where the wealthy mind lives, not in the waiting, but in the having. This is how every great manifestation begins, not with a plan, but with a feeling so genuine that the world must conspire to prove it true. This is where you finally realize that emotion, when aligned with assumption, is the engine of all abundance. Suppose you discover that all your striving, grinding, and exhaustion were never proof of determination, but signs that you had forgotten your original power of effortless alignment. This is where it begins, when you realize that effort belongs to the one who doubts, while ease belongs to the one who knows. This is how it unfolds, as you shift from pushing outcomes into place to allowing them to arrange themselves according to your inner state. This is where the old story cracks, the one that said you must fight for every blessing, and you start to see that force only mirrors resistance. This is the turning point, when alignment becomes your new work, an inward calibration to the feeling of abundance that naturally magnetizes its likeness. This is where truth softens the edges of ambition, replacing urgency with calm power. This is how you begin to act, not from lack, but from inspired confidence that what you desire is already underway. This is where illusion fades, as you notice that less action born from clarity achieves more than frantic movement born from fear. This is how flow begins, each moment guided by intuitive timing rather than rigid planning. This is where wealth starts to feel alive, responding to you because you have stopped wrestling with it. This is how surrender becomes strength, when you trust the unseen process as much as the visible progress. This is where your energy recalibrates, no longer scattered across 1,000 what-ifs, but gathered in a single I am. This is how the mind quiets, listening for inner nudges instead of outer noise. This is where your path becomes smoother, not because challenges vanish, but because you move through them with certainty rather than struggle. This is how abundance reveals its natural rhythm, arriving not through strain but synchronicity. This is where wealth ceases to be a chase and becomes a dance, guided by intuition's music. This is how the wealth state matures, through trust, patience, and inner coherence. This is where you understand that divine timing is not delay but design. This is how you step into mastery, realizing that everything that flows easily is already aligned with who you truly are. This is where effort ends, alignment begins, and the current of abundance carries you effortlessly forward. Envision a world where everything you see in your outer life, your bank account, relationships, opportunities, is nothing more than a mirror reflecting your inner assumptions about yourself. This is where it begins, when you stop blaming circumstances and start observing the consciousness that projects them. This is how it unfolds, as you recognize that reality is not personal punishment or reward, but precise reflection. This is where truth pierces illusion, showing that every financial drought began as a belief in limitation, and every breakthrough as a belief in worthiness. This is the turning point, when you understand that the world has never been against you, it has only been echoing your self-concept. This is where the observer becomes the artist, painting wealth and success by adjusting inner vision rather than outer conditions. This is how perception becomes power, because once you see differently within, you cannot encounter the same world without. This is where illusion collapses, as you realize there is no out there, only consciousness externalized. This is how the wise transform lack, not by fighting appearances, but by revising the belief that produced them. This is where self-awareness replaces complaint, and introspection replaces reaction. This is how cause and effect merge, revealing that consciousness is both seed and soil of experience. This is where you stop chasing validation from the mirror and start perfecting the image you project. This is how humility and power coexist, for when you know you are the cause, you also know you can change the effect. This is where new responsibility dawns, not as burden but as freedom to recreate. This is how gratitude grows, not for what you have, but for the realization that you are the source. This is where clarity blooms, for the moment you correct the inner image, the mirror must respond. This is how transformation becomes mechanical, predictable and inevitable under the law of consciousness. This is where reality itself begins to feel pliable, bending to the shape of your assumption. This is how you finally see that the wealth state is not about controlling reflection, but mastering projection. This is where awareness becomes abundance, and the mirror of life gleams with the truth you now dare to hold. Think of the moment when you finally realize that wealth is not something you acquire, but something you are, an identity you either assume or deny with every thought you think. This is where it begins, when you notice that people do not attract what they want, they attract what they believe themselves to be. This is how it unfolds, as you trace every result in your life back to an inner self-concept quietly defining what you are allowed to experience. This is where truth speaks clearly, revealing that changing your finances without changing your identity is like repainting a wall without fixing the foundation. This is the turning point, where the question shifts from, how do I get money, to who must I be to naturally live in abundance? This is where illusion fades, because pretending to be wealthy is not arrogance, it is the rehearsal of truth. This is how self-perception becomes the architect of destiny, silently scripting every opportunity, encounter, and outcome. This is where the wealthy self begins to awaken, not in your circumstances, but in your consciousness. This is how the transformation begins, when you stop saying, I will become successful, and start declaring, I am success unfolding. This is where alignment deepens, because once you change who you believe yourself to be, everything that matches that identity must appear. This is how reality mirrors conviction, responding not to effort, but to essence. This is where self-image becomes a frequency, and wealth starts to orbit naturally around your new vibration. This is how inner conversations shift, replacing doubt with certainty, and fear with quiet knowing. This is where power feels intimate, as you realize that identity precedes evidence, and that nothing can stay in your life that contradicts who you believe you are. This is how the old self dissolves, quietly releasing every belief that whispered not enough. This is where confidence becomes character, not an act, but a state of being. This is how the wealth state stabilizes, no longer something to visit during meditation, but something you carry everywhere you go. This is where manifestation becomes effortless, for life can only reflect your dominant concept of self. This is how you finally understand that you were never chasing wealth. You are only remembering who you have always been. This is where the true identity of wealth stands revealed. Not a possession, but a presence you now claim as your own. Ask yourself what happens when you stop waiting for external proof and begin to live fully as if your wealth already exists, embracing every moment with the certainty of fulfillment. This is where it begins, when imagination becomes your rehearsal stage, and every thought, feeling, and action dances in alignment with the life you already own in consciousness. This is how it unfolds, as you notice subtle shifts, a lighter step, a calm heart, and decisions that flow naturally from confidence, rather than desperation. This is where truth illuminates your path, revealing that the outer world cannot contradict what you consistently assume inwardly. This is the turning point, when living as if stops being a strategy and becomes a lifestyle, seamless and second nature. This is where illusion fades, because the outer conditions are no longer the measure of your state, the inner reality dictates the course. This is how momentum builds quietly, unseen but unstoppable, as your daily choices ripple from a foundation of certainty. This is where faith transforms into evidence, as people, opportunities, and circumstances align themselves with the frequency you maintain. This is how subtle cues in life begin to affirm your assumption, each synchronicity a silent nod from the universe. This is where ease replaces struggle, as you stop negotiating with appearances and start trusting the scene you hold in imagination. This is how the wealth state deepens, becoming a lens through which every interaction, challenge, and reward is interpreted. This is where desire is no longer hungry but satisfied in anticipation, for the feeling of already having suffices. This is how the invisible law works relentlessly, responding to consistency, not volume or speed. This is where patience becomes powerful, and waiting is replaced by present certainty. This is how your inner world orchestrates the outer, proving that thought and feeling are the only architects of experience. This is where abundance begins to feel like home, familiar and inevitable. This is how every small act, from gratitude to visualization, becomes a declaration of wealth. This is where your imagination grows bold, painting scenes that demand reality to follow. This is how alignment creates effortless manifestation, bridging desire and fulfillment without friction. This is where living as if becomes the art of embodying the wealth state itself, until being abundant is no longer a choice, but simply who you are. Consider the possibility that wealth is not something you chase, accumulate, or control, but a current that flows invisibly to anyone aligned with its frequency. This is where it begins, when you recognize that every time you struggle, resist, or grasp, you are interrupting a stream that would otherwise carry you effortlessly. This is how it unfolds, as you start observing moments when ideas, opportunities, and resources seem to appear with almost uncanny timing, revealing the natural intelligence behind the unseen flow. This is where truth breaks gently, showing that prosperity does not negotiate, it responds to resonance. This is the turning point, when you shift from managing life to moving with life, allowing energy to orchestrate the arrangements you cannot yet see. This is where illusion fades, because the need to force, plan, or hurry only slows what is already coming. This is how stillness becomes a tool of creation, and quiet expectation a catalyst for abundance. This is where patience is no longer passive, but active alignment with the law that governs all invisible currents. This is how your attention begins to shape reality, focusing not on lack, but on the readiness to receive. This is where confidence becomes magnetic, not through demonstration, but through internal steadiness. This is how prosperity begins to feel like a tide, lifting everything aligned with its wave. This is where gratitude amplifies the current, converting appreciation into energetic motion. This is how the mind begins to recognize the rhythm of opportunity and begins moving in harmony. This is where the wealth state shifts from concept to lived experience, as every inner adjustment reverberates outward. This is how you stop chasing and start receiving, simply by embodying the frequency that matches your desire. This is where inspiration replaces obligation, guiding each step with effortless clarity. This is how alignment transforms moments of waiting into fertile periods of preparation. This is where the unseen becomes undeniable, moving circumstances, people, and fortune in your favor. This is how the invisible flow reveals its true nature. Abundance is never distant. It is only waiting for your state of being to match its passage. This is where you finally understand that the wealth state is not earned or discovered. It is inhabited, and the current of life bends naturally to those who dwell within it. Now consider this. What if every act of genuine gratitude is not merely polite acknowledgement, but a creative force that shapes reality itself and accelerates the arrival of wealth? This is where it begins, as you notice that gratitude shifts your focus from scarcity to sufficiency, and in doing so signals to the universe that you are ready to receive. This is how it unfolds, when you start feeling grateful not for what you have, but for the life you are imagining and the wealth you are assuming as already yours. This is where truth pierces the veil, revealing that appreciation is more potent than effort, more magnetic than anxiety, and more revealing than planning. This is the turning point, when gratitude stops being a response and becomes a proactive declaration of abundance. This is where illusion fades, for complaining or worrying can no longer coexist with the conscious act of thanking in advance. This is how energy rearranges, drawing people, opportunities, and resources toward the frequency you radiate. This is where subtlety matters, for the depth of your feeling amplifies the effect, turning a moment of reflection into a bridge between thought and manifestation. This is how momentum builds, quietly and persistently, as the universe mirrors the reverberations of your heartfelt acknowledgement. This is where patience becomes pleasure, because every sign of wealth is now anticipated with joy rather than desperation. This is how imagination and gratitude fuse, creating a magnetic field that naturally organizes circumstances to reflect your assumption. This is where the wealth state solidifies, as your inner life dictates outer reality with precision. This is how alignment strengthens, for consistent thankfulness trains your mind and emotions to dwell in abundance, not lack. This is where small, everyday acknowledgments become powerful rituals of creation. This is how prosperity begins to flow effortlessly, not as a result of calculation, but of authentic inner recognition. This is where your consciousness learns to govern the visible world silently, shaping outcomes without struggle. This is how you stop chasing, because gratitude opens the door to what is already yours. This is where faith deepens, strengthened by repeated evidence of alignment between inner state and external reflection. This is how life becomes a canvas, and gratitude the brush painting scenes of wealth and ease. This is where you finally awaken to the subtle truth. To live in the wealth state is to give thanks for what is yet unseen, and in doing so, to command its immediate arrival. Envision a world where every outcome in your life is not determined by effort, luck, or circumstance, but by the assumptions you hold most vividly in consciousness. This is where it begins, when you recognize that the mental scenes you dwell upon silently construct the blueprint of your reality. This is how it unfolds, as you observe that imagining wealth with unwavering conviction elicits external conditions that reflect that inner certainty. This is where truth breaks through, showing that to assume is not mere wishful thinking, it is an active command to the universe. This is the turning point, when you replace hope with deliberate inner experience, knowing that life mirrors your inner state with absolute fidelity. This is where illusion fades, because external appearances no longer have the power to dictate your sense of sufficiency. This is how alignment grows, as repeated assumption trains your consciousness to dwell naturally in abundance rather than lack. This is where subtle forces gather, orchestrating events, people, and opportunities to match the reality you hold inside. This is how imagination becomes tangible, shaping circumstances before any action in the outer world is necessary. This is where patience and faith merge, for the assumed state carries a certainty beyond time. This is how your inner self becomes the primary actor, while outer conditions follow passively, responding to the energy you maintain. This is where the wealth state strengthens, grounded in consistent assumption rather than sporadic desire. This is how doubt dissolves, for persistence in assuming your fulfilled state overrides contradictory appearances. This is where the magnetic power of consciousness accelerates, drawing resources and opportunities as if by invisible law. This is how action becomes inspired, rather than frantic, flowing effortlessly from a confident state of being. This is where the art of mental rehearsal becomes mastery, rehearsing success until it feels inevitable. This is how fear and scarcity lose authority, replaced by the calm dominance of knowing. This is where your life begins to echo your assumptions consistently, producing results in perfect timing. This is how the wealth state manifests, through the deliberate practice of assuming, feeling, and dwelling in abundance, until it becomes the natural fabric of your reality. This is where the invisible law proves itself, silently transforming your inner conviction into outer evidence of wealth and freedom. Picture for a moment that every financial outcome, every opportunity, and every obstacle in your life is governed by the unseen architecture of belief, quietly shaping reality before your eyes ever perceive it. This is where it begins, when you notice that beliefs are not passive opinions, but active generators of experience, silently scripting every circumstance. This is how it unfolds, as you learn to distinguish between inherited, unconscious beliefs and those deliberately chosen to reflect abundance. This is where truth breaks through, revealing that scarcity persists not because of lack outside, but because of entrenched conviction within. This is the turning point, when you start replacing doubt, fear, and limitation with deliberate, wealth-focused assumptions. This is where illusion fades, as you recognize that effort without belief is like pouring water into a leaky vessel. It cannot hold. This is how alignment strengthens, for beliefs anchored in imagination and feeling act as magnets for corresponding realities. This is where subtle energy begins to move, orchestrating circumstances, ideas, and connections in response to your inner state. This is how confidence arises, because the more consistently you choose empowering beliefs, the more life confirms them in visible form. This is where the wealth state becomes tangible, not as a distant goal, but as a natural byproduct of assumed conviction. This is how habits of thought are transformed, turning repetitive scarcity thinking into automatic abundance awareness. This is where you notice synchronicities, small nudges, and opportunities aligning seamlessly with your chosen inner state. This is how trust deepens, because belief sustained becomes proof, evidence accumulating in perfect sequence. This is where imagination is harnessed scientifically, each scene rehearsed with precision to produce inevitable results. This is how external resistance loses its power, for the inner law is inviolable. This is where action is inspired rather than forced, flowing from alignment rather than obligation. This is how patience is replaced by confident expectancy, knowing that every outcome mirrors your chosen state of consciousness. This is where doubt becomes irrelevant, fading in the face of unwavering inner assumption. This is how the wealth state solidifies, built not on transactions, but on deliberate, sustained belief. This is where the silent science of consciousness transforms your financial. Envision a life where your grip on outcomes loosens, and yet, paradoxically, everything you desire begins to flow toward you effortlessly, untouched by struggle or anxiety. This is where it begins, when you recognize that attachment to results often blocks the very manifestation you seek. This is how it unfolds, as you learn to act, plan, and imagine without clutching desperately, allowing circumstances to align naturally with your inner state. This is where truth pierces illusion, showing that control is an illusion and detachment is the true engine of influence. This is the turning point, when expectation transforms into serene knowing rather than restless wanting. This is where fear and desperation fade, replaced by the quiet confidence that abundance cannot bypass one aligned with it. This is how your energy shifts, moving from tension and urgency to calm and magnetism. This is where patience takes on power, as timing ceases to be a constraint and becomes an ally of consciousness. This is how opportunities present themselves unbidden, drawn not by chasing, but by the vibrational signal of freedom. This is where the wealth state deepens, because the act of detachment confirms your faith in unseen forces. This is how imagination operates without interference, creating scenes with clarity and emotional conviction. This is where inner alignment begins to dictate outer flow, turning ordinary moments into orchestrated steps toward abundance. This is how synchronicities multiply, each one a subtle confirmation of your non-resistance. This is where inner peace becomes fertile ground, allowing prosperity to germinate and expand. This is how the mind learns that less grip equals more manifestation. This is where belief in inevitability replaces anxiety over timing or method. This is how life mirrors your detachment, delivering resources and opportunities in perfect sequence. This is where you begin to inhabit wealth effortlessly, as your inner state commands outer reality. This is how the wealth state matures, no longer dependent on striving, but flourishing naturally in the harmony of assumption and detachment. This is where you realize that true abundance is experienced when you surrender to its current, letting it carry you gracefully forward. Can you imagine that the very moment you assume a state of wealth and abundance, you become a magnet, drawing people, circumstances, and opportunities that match that inner reality? This is where it begins, when you realize that your consciousness emits a signal, an energetic signature, that the universe responds to with precision. This is how it unfolds, as every thought, feeling, and belief begins to act like a tuning fork, aligning the outer world with the frequency you maintain. This is where truth shatters the illusion, revealing that what you radiate internally is mirrored externally, effortlessly and without force. This is the turning point, when you stop persuading reality and start embodying the reality that naturally attracts the right conditions. This is where resistance fades, because alignment replaces struggle and magnetic presence commands response. This is how opportunity surfaces, often in surprising ways, as if life conspires to meet you where you already exist. This is where the wealth state deepens, for when you consistently assume abundance, your outer world can no longer contradict your inner certainty. This is how action becomes inspired, flowing naturally from the momentum created by your inner signal rather than from desperation. This is where patience transforms, replaced by anticipation infused with calm confidence. This is how synchronicities become undeniable as chance meetings, timely information, and unexpected resources converge seamlessly around you. This is where belief strengthens, for repeated evidence accumulates, confirming the invisible law in action. This is how imagination acts as a compass, pointing you towards situations and opportunities that reflect the wealth you embody. This is where gratitude amplifies your magnetism, reinforcing the energetic signal you project. This is how alignment replaces effort and ease becomes the engine of creation. This is where your perception shifts, recognizing that outer forms are reflections, not determinants of your inner state. This is how detachment and assumption coexist, creating a field in which abundance naturally circulates. This is where energy organizes itself around your certainty, forming pathways previously unseen. This is how the wealth state reveals its power. Your inner reality dictates outer manifestation with perfect fidelity. This is where you finally realize that abundance does not chase you. You simply resonate in a way that compels it to arrive. Think of the moment when action stops being a desperate attempt to force outcomes and becomes a natural extension of your inner state of abundance, flowing effortlessly from clarity and confidence. This is where it begins, when you recognize that inspired action is not effortful struggle, but a movement guided by alignment with your assumed reality. This is how it unfolds, as you start responding to intuitive nudges, ideas, and impulses that feel effortless, yet carry enormous impact. This is where truth reveals itself, showing that the outer world only moves in harmony with the energy you maintain within. This is the turning point, when every action becomes a declaration of abundance, a demonstration of your inner conviction, rather than a plea for confirmation. This is where illusion fades, because frantic attempts and stress-driven activity no longer dictate results. This is how the wealth state deepens, for inspired action flows naturally from someone who already feels wealthy, confident, and aligned. This is where timing becomes effortless, as you act in harmony with the currents of opportunity rather than against them. This is how obstacles dissolve, not by fighting, but by moving with subtle intelligence, guided by intuition and clarity. This is where results accelerate, appearing as if by unseen orchestration, because you are no longer pushing, only flowing. This is how imagination and action merge, each step reflecting the inner reality you maintain. This is where patience transforms into strategic momentum, each movement aligned with the energy of fulfillment. This is how synchronicities multiply, as your actions attract the people, circumstances, and resources that match your frequency. This is where fear and hesitation lose influence, replaced by confidence in the invisible law at work. This is how mastery feels, effortless yet potent, every step and expression of your inner assumption. This is where abundance begins to circulate, not as an external prize, but as a natural consequence of alignment. This is how you stop reacting and start creating, moving through life as a conscious magnet for prosperity. This is where the wealth state becomes lived experience, expressed in every thoughtful, inspired act. This is how fulfillment becomes inevitable, flowing from a seamless blend of inner certainty and external response. This is where you finally understand that the greatest wealth is not in accumulation, but in the effortless art of acting from abundance itself. Envision a reality where every word you speak to yourself becomes a subtle declaration, shaping not only your emotions but the very circumstances of your life. This is where it begins, when you realize that inner dialogue governs outer experience far more than conscious plans or external effort ever could. This is how it unfolds, as you start monitoring the language of your mind, noticing every phrase that affirms lack versus every phrase that embodies abundance. This is where truth pierces through, revealing that habitual self-talk is the silent architect of your financial and personal reality. This is the turning point, when you deliberately choose statements that reinforce wealth, sufficiency, and possibility, turning inner thought into creative command. This is where illusion fades, because blaming circumstances or others loses potency in the face of disciplined mental stewardship. This is how the wealth state strengthens, as consistent, affirmative inner dialogue rewires beliefs and recalibrates vibration. This is where subtle shifts in phrasing transform hesitation into confidence and fear into expectation. This is how imagination and language merge, each sentence forming the blueprint of reality before it appears externally. This is where consistency becomes power, for repeated affirmation creates momentum invisible yet irresistible. This is how you notice outer events bending to reflect the reality you habitually cultivate within. This is where gratitude and inner acknowledgement amplify your spoken and silent words, multiplying their creative influence. This is how restraint and discernment in thought prevent energy leaks that would undermine your assumption. This is where alignment grows, because words and feelings operate together as a cohesive force. This is how obstacles appear less daunting, as your inner dialogue anticipates solutions rather than amplifying problems. This is where opportunity becomes recognizable, filtered through the lens of assumed success. This is how confidence becomes second nature, originating in the mind before it manifests in action. This is where the wealth state is solidified, not by outer validation, but by the careful curation of your inner conversation. This is how life begins to echo the reality you nurture silently, revealing the unseen power of consistent, deliberate mental language. This is where you finally awaken to the truth. Mastery of inner dialogue is mastery of the abundance you seek, and your wealth state is born from the words you speak within. Picture for a moment that every scene you imagine with vivid detail becomes a seed, quietly planting itself in the soil of reality until it blooms in visible form. This is where it begins, when you realize that visualization is not fantasy, but a rehearsal for what consciousness intends to produce. This is how it unfolds, as you learn to immerse yourself fully in the experience of already having what you desire, feeling the sights, sounds, and emotions as if real. This is where truth breaks through, showing that the universe responds not to your wishes, but to the richness of your imagined experience. This is the turning point, when each mental image acts as a command, aligning circumstances, people, and resources to match the scene you hold within. This is where illusion fades, because imagining lack only reinforces absence, while imagining abundance generates tangible momentum. This is how alignment grows, as repeated visualization strengthens belief, conviction, and emotional resonance with your desired reality. This is where subtle forces orchestrate themselves, creating synchronicities and opportunities that feel divinely timed. This is how imagination becomes a magnet, drawing toward you the very evidence of what you hold as true internally. This is where patience transforms, for persistent, detailed mental rehearsal reduces the need for struggle and accelerates manifestation. This is how the wealth state deepens, as visualization becomes habitual, seamless, and emotionally charged. This is where doubt dissolves, replaced by the certainty born of repeated inner evidence. This is how inspired action arises naturally, guided by the clarity your mind has already rehearsed. This is where energy circulates freely, flowing toward the reality that your imagination has pre-constructed. This is how gratitude enhances visualization, adding magnetic weight to every imagined scene. This is where inner confidence solidifies, as your mind knows the end result is already accomplished. This is how the outer world bends gently to the script of your inner theater. This is where abundance becomes tangible, no longer hypothetical, but lived and embodied in expectation. This is how the wealth state manifests effortlessly, as your imagination, emotion, and assumption converge into a singular creative command. This is where you finally realize that visualization is not optional, but essential, the silent engine behind the life you desire and deserve. Envision a space around you where every thought, feeling, and interaction vibrates with the unmistakable energy of wealth, freedom, and possibility, transforming ordinary moments into a fertile field for manifestation. This is where it begins, when you recognize that abundance is not just an internal state, but an atmosphere you cultivate that influences everything and everyone around you. This is how it unfolds, as your presence radiates confidence, ease, and expectation, subtly shifting the energy of situations in your favor. This is where truth becomes undeniable, showing that environments respond to the tone, clarity, and coherence of your consciousness. This is the turning point, when you stop chasing external validation and start projecting a magnetic field of sufficiency that draws people, opportunities, and resources naturally. This is where illusion fades, because scarcity cannot thrive where abundance has become the dominant vibration. This is how alignment strengthens, as the energy you emit creates a gravitational pull for experiences and circumstances that match it. This is where your decisions become effortless, guided by the invisible currents of the wealth state you inhabit. This is how subtle energy organizes itself, opening doors, attracting mentors, and aligning resources without force. This is where inspired action flows naturally, as each choice is an extension of the abundance already present within you. This is how gratitude amplifies the atmosphere, reinforcing the signal of wealth that your consciousness broadcasts. This is where patience becomes potent, because the steady vibration of abundance orchestrates timing and flow in perfect harmony. This is how your imagination shapes not only internal but external landscapes, projecting a life that mirrors your inner reality. This is where fear and doubt dissolve, eclipsed by the certainty of a magnetic, abundant presence. This is how synchronicities accelerate, with unseen forces arranging outcomes in alignment with your state. This is where the wealth state permeates every interaction, every decision, and every environment you enter. This is how mastery feels, effortless yet precise, each moment resonating with the energy of fulfillment. This is where outer reality bends, reflecting the internal coherence you have cultivated. This is how abundance becomes your default atmosphere, not something you occasionally summon, but the environment you naturally inhabit. This is where you finally awaken to the truth. To live in the wealth state is to radiate abundance so consistently that reality itself aligns without hesitation or resistance. Ask yourself what happens when the state of abundance you cultivate within begins to radiate outward, subtly transforming every relationship, opportunity, and circumstance it touches. This is where it begins, when you realize that your inner wealth state is not contained. It ripples, influencing the environment and people around you in ways both seen and unseen. This is how it unfolds, as your confidence, clarity, and emotional alignment create vibrations that draw resources, allies, and favorable conditions towards you effortlessly. This is where truth emerges, showing that the outer world responds to the quality of consciousness you maintain, amplifying and echoing it back in tangible form. This is the turning point, when you understand that prosperity is not merely a personal achievement, but a force that spreads, attracting cooperation, opportunity, and collaboration. This is where illusion fades, because scarcity cannot coexist with the expansive energy of inner wealth. This is how momentum builds, as each action, decision, and thought aligned with abundance strengthens the ripple, widening its reach. This is where inspiration flows naturally, guiding you to situations and people that resonate with your assumed reality. This is how synchronicities multiply, as your inner state orchestrates seemingly random events into coordinated opportunities. This is where gratitude amplifies the effect, magnifying the magnetic influence of your wealth state across your surroundings. This is how outer recognition follows inner conviction, creating a feedback loop of confidence, alignment, and tangible manifestation. This is where subtle energy becomes the driver of real-world results, translating thought and emotion into material evidence. This is how challenges are softened, as your inner stability influences outcomes and interactions in ways that reduce friction. This is where patience transforms into strategic anticipation, trusting the ripple to unfold naturally without force. This is how your identity evolves, becoming inseparable from the abundant influence you radiate. This is where the wealth state stabilizes, no longer fragile or conditional, but self-perpetuating and influential. This is how your life becomes a conduit, not just for personal gain, but for creating value and abundance in the world around you. This is how mastery manifests, effortlessly and organically, through consistent inner alignment. This is where you finally see that true wealth is never isolated. It is a ripple that grows, touches, and multiplies, reflecting the magnitude of the consciousness from which it originates. This is where the invisible becomes visible, and the wealth state proves itself as both source and signal, quietly reshaping everything it encounters. Consider the possibility that the ultimate secret of wealth is not found in possessions, income, or status, but in the consistent inner state you cultivate, a state from which all abundance flows naturally. This is where it begins, when you realize that living as wealthy is not about accumulating evidence, but embodying the reality in which wealth already exists. This is how it unfolds, as you carry yourself with certainty, clarity, and emotional resonance that aligns perfectly with the life you desire. This is where truth illuminates the path, showing that external validation is optional, while internal alignment is non-negotiable. This is the turning point, when every thought, feeling, and action becomes an expression of your assumed state rather than a reaction to lack. This is where illusion fades, because chasing, striving, or comparing loses power when you inhabit a consistent state of inner fulfillment. This is how energy flows, effortlessly drawing opportunities, resources, and collaborations that reflect the frequency you maintain. This is where patience and faith converge, as you trust that what has been assumed inwardly cannot fail to manifest outwardly. This is how imagination and emotion fuse, creating a living blueprint that the universe instinctively honors. This is where inspired action arises naturally, flowing without force, yet producing extraordinary results. This is how synchronicities align, orchestrated by the unseen intelligence that responds to your inner state. This is where gratitude solidifies the experience, reinforcing both awareness and reception. This is how challenges lose their weight, for your consistent state reframes obstacles as opportunities in alignment with abundance. This is where identity merges with manifestation, becoming inseparable from the wealth state you inhabit. This is how confidence becomes effortless, not a mask, but a reflection of your inner reality. This is where alignment becomes habitual, an automatic resonance that sustains and expands prosperity. This is how influence grows, as your state touches others and draws favorable conditions without coercion. This is where life itself becomes a mirror, reflecting the depth and consistency of your assumption. This is how mastery of the wealth state is realized, by living from abundance rather than toward it, making every moment, interaction, and choice an expression of what you already are. This is where you finally awaken to the profound truth. Wealth is not a destination, it is a state